Hello, my name is William Harmon, and I'm a student at Kennesaw State University. For our final project for server systems, I wanted to go over our vulnerability assessment. Now, the purpose of our vulnerability assessment is to take what we learned throughout the semester and enact this in a basically half semester long project. This project is focusing on taking two servers, one is a Windows and one is a Linux, and being able to harden those structures and servers to make sure that they are as safe as possible. At the end of the semester, we use Greenbone as a tool to be able to scan those servers, as well as Nmap, which was the tool of choice for me, to be able to find any issues and then be able to remediate those. Our goal today is to focus on the one critical vulnerability that we did find after hardening my servers and go about understanding how we will take care of that hardening recommendation and fix that situation. Now, I hope you enjoy. If you do have questions, please wait to the very end, and hopefully they will be answered throughout, and I hope that you can find this educational. Thank you so much for allowing me in class. As we spoke about, the agenda of today and the agenda of the project was to evaluate and enhance the security posture of our server infrastructure. Now, the assessment covers both Windows and Linux servers, and it focuses on SSL and TLS configurations today. Now, while the project did not specifically focus on those configurations, I decided to focus on them today because that is where we did find our critical vulnerability. And I want to go over how we are going to be able to fix that vulnerability and what's our goal for that vulnerability. Now, we went over many different hardening recommendations and many different options, and we'll go over that in the next few slides. But as I said, I want to focus this assessment in this PowerPoint on the one that we did find, which of course was the SSL TLS configuration in that. The methodology that we chose to be able to go over this was Greenbone scanning. It's a security assistant for automated scanning, and then we supplemented with manual configuration reviews, making sure that we were up to date. We also used Nmap scanning as well. The Nmap scanning was allowing us, as per the server directions, to be able to find a multitude of different things and then go through those hardening recommendations as per the guide. And we're going to go over that guide together to make sure that everyone fully understands. Here is our overview of findings, and as you can see, there's a multitude of things that we went over. So we had scanned both the Windows, which was 192.168.5.192, and Linux, which was 192.168.5.191. Those were the two servers that were analyzed. Sorry. Now, as you can see with our firewall, it was up on both for Windows and Linux. It was perfectly active, and that's for firewall and IP tables. For AppArmor, Windows was not applicable, but for Linux, it was up and it was hardened in per instructions. For HTTP, Windows and Linux were not necessary and did not come up. Not only do we have to make sure that the findings that were required came up, we also had to make sure the findings that were not required did not show up. And if you see any blanks, AppArmor, POP, POP3S, IMAP, IMAPS, Database, SSH, that's because for Windows those are not applicable, which means those programs are not something that you'll see on there. So that anything that is blank would normally be blacked out, but because of our PowerPoint situation, we did not want to include that blacking out to affect people's vision. So moving on, for HTTPS, for Windows, we did IIS, which is a yes, it did show up. For Linux, we did Apache, which was a yes, that did show up. As for POP, it's not applicable for Windows, and for Linux, it was unnecessary, and our scan showed it did not show up, which is great. For POP3S, again, Windows is not applicable, but for Linux, Dovecot was present in our scannings, which is amazing. For SMTP, both were unnecessary and both did not show up as an open port, which was amazing in our Nmap scans. For IMAP, as you can imagine, Windows, not applicable. And for Linux, it did not show up, which again is very important to make sure that not only does it when we do those Nmap scans, those open ports don't show that that is available. Because when an open port is available, it allows for security risks, right? People are able to hack into your servers. The people are able to input different attacks into there. So for IMAPs, again, not applicable for Windows. It was found with Dovecot, just like the POP3S, which was active in correct port, which is fantastic. DNS was yes for both of them. Windows uses IIS, and Linux uses bind. Database, of course, not applicable for Windows. Linux, yes, we did configure Postgres. SSH, again, Windows, not applicable. Linux, yes, we used OpenSSH. Now, at the very bottom here, this is important to be able to reflect and look back at. If our ZenMap, or in this case, we use Nmap, shows other open ports that do not correspond, they should be listed here. Thankfully, nothing was shown after multiple server checks. When we first started out, there was a lot of things that needed to be remediated, and I was able to accomplish all of them. Now for the Windows Server vulnerability. The vulnerability details, we identified a Suite 32 vulnerability in SSL and TLS configuration. Now the Cipher Suite explained is an outdated TLS RSA with 3DES, EDE, CVC, SHA Cipher Suite. Now that is a lot of words, and really what that means is there was a vulnerability that allowed us with an outdated Cipher Suite to be able to be attacked by the Suite 32 vulnerability. Though Suite 32 vulnerability is important, and we'll go into remediation steps later into the slides of what we can do to make sure that doesn't happen. Let's look at those. The criticality of the Windows vulnerability. The CVSS score is a standard measure of vulnerability severity. The threat level was a medium threat level with a score of 5. Now the threats can go from 0 to 10. Anything under 8 is not what we would call an extremely critical or high severity. And medium is something that does need to be remediated, that can be taken advantage of, but will not be a high severity, which is extremely important. Now the solutions and recommendations for the Windows Server to get fixed. We must update the SSL and TLS configuration to modify and to eliminate the use of the Cipher Suite, which is vulnerable to the Suite 32 attack. We must log in and assess the configuration file, locate the section that specifies the suites, remove or comment out the line containing. It's recommended to replace it with more secure Cipher Suites. After making the changes, save the configuration file and exit the editor. Now, this is very important because it allows us to be able to make some changes into there. So make sure that you're able to follow this, and of course there's multiple There's multiple ways to be able to suit that. So we'll go back over those towards the end, so that way we can focus on those. For our Linux server vulnerability, we did find absolutely nothing, which is great because that means that it reflects a robust security practices, and then that server is completely secure. Unlike the Windows server where we have to adjust the suite the Cipher Suite vulnerability. And of course, I don't want to go over into too much detail into that as we skip past that, the little bit of the nuances, so that way we're not boring each other, as there are many different ways. And at the end of the slides and presentation, I'll show you the ways that we can fix that with a reference guide. Now, the conclusion, the next steps. Linux server exhibits robust security. Windows Server requires immediate action to fix vulnerability. The next step would be to remediate the Windows vulnerability. As you can see from the 2 slides ago, there is a details on exactly how we're going to do that. But of course, with all technology, it's important to understand that things change. And what works on your system may not work on a different operating system, or importantly might not work with new updates. So as Windows updates, as there's different operating systems, we must be incorporating that things will change. And quite honestly, sometimes some things work for you and some things don't work for me. So being able to be subjective to being loose and open is important. Our 2 reference points are Common Vulnerability Scoring System, the CVSS we went over to, and the Mozilla Foundation, which is about the SSL configuration, which are going to be those 2 things. Now, it's important for us to be able to recommend these so that way we can show exactly what we're looking for into these and make sure that everything is up to date and that we're following the most advanced and most up-to-date fixes for these. The CVSS is important for understanding the green bone scanning, and then the Mozilla SSL configuration generator is important as a way that we can remediate that issue. Thank you so much for being a part of my server vulnerability assessment, and I hope you learned something. Feel free to comment below, and I can help you out.